My name is Mila Hart. I'm 27 and I work the counter at a pharmacy in a town so small it doesn't even show up on half the maps. Most days I hand out allergy meds and listen to the hum of fluorescent lights echoing over empty aisles. At home I wash dishes for a mother who sighs like I ruined her life and a stepfather who calls me kid like it's an insult. My half-sister Lexi is a TikTok star with 2 million followers and zero kindness to spare. If you ask me what my life feels like, I'd say it's like being wallpaper in a room no one notices anymore. But all of that changed the day they left me behind. I didn't say anything wrong. I didn't roll my eyes. I didn't sigh or complain. I just sat there quietly staring out the window as the sunset bled orange and gold across the highway, smearing light over cracked asphalt and sagebrush. Inside the van, 12 of us were packed together like sardines, music blasting, Lexi laughing her bright, sugary laugh that always felt like a slap. They were playing some stupid road trip game, shouting out songs and movies, guessing quotes. I didn't join in. I never did. I was just the shadow in the corner of every family photo, the blurred edge no one bothered to crop out. Still, I'd packed the snacks that morning, arranged them neatly in Ziploc bags by type sweet, salty protein. I'd loaded the heavy suitcases into the trunk, checked under the seats for Lexi's sunglasses when she shrieked that they were missing. I even offered her the front seat when she pouted at me, mascaraed lashes blinking like a warning light. Move, she'd snapped, and I moved. Because that's what I did. You're always so distant, Mila. Lighten up. It's just a joke. That's what they told me when Lexi filmed me half asleep against the window, my cheek pressed to the glass drool, smudging the corner of my mouth. She posted it to TikTok with the caption, "Road trip with emo girl vibes." I didn't even flinch when her followers flooded the comments with laughing emojis. I'd stopped expecting dignity a long time ago. On the fourth day, we stopped at a gas station somewhere in the middle of Idaho. The sun was starting to dip behind the endless stretch of dry fields, turning the world into shadows and rust. I went inside to pee, washed my hands under the too-cold faucet, and looked at myself in the cracked mirror. Same tired brown eyes. Same chapped lips. Same girl who never spoke unless spoken to. When I came back out, the parking lot felt oddly empty. I scanned the rows of cars, expecting to see our two vans parked side by side. I blinked against the harsh sunlight. The vans weren't there. My first thought was that they'd moved to another spot. Maybe someone wanted a drink or Lexi needed better lighting for her live stream. I walked along the pavement, heat radiating up through the soles of my shoes, burning my feet. My throat was tight, but I told myself, don't be dramatic. Don't be paranoid. Then I saw it. A folded piece of notebook paper taped to the bench by the trash cans. The wind lifted one edge, making it flutter like a dying moth. I knew that handwriting, instantly bubbly round with little hearts dotting the eyes. Lexi's signature aesthetic. Let's see if you can figure this one out. 7 words. My heart stuttered. For a moment, the world tilted sideways the way it does when you stand up too fast. I looked around again, searching for their faces behind the pumps, imagining them giggling, crouched out of sight with their phones recording my reaction. But there was no giggling, no camera, no footsteps crunching over gravel to say, "Gotcha." Just silence. And the fading warmth of an Idaho evening. I stood there for what felt like an hour, the note trembling in my fingers. The sun burned down into the parking lot, heat swirling in waves around me, and the only sound was the cicadas screaming in the grass beyond the asphalt. I tried to swallow, but my mouth was dry. A fly buzzed past my ear, and I flinched so hard my vision blurred. Tears burned behind my eyes, but none fell. Crying felt pointless. There was no one here to see it anyway. It wasn't fear that hollowed me out. Not yet. The fear would come later with the darkness and the hunger and the bone-deep chill of dawn. No, what gutted me in that moment was the laughter I could still hear in my mind, the echo of it as they drove away without me. Because I knew it was there. I knew Lexi had said something snarky, Ralph had chuckled low in his chest, and the others had laughed along, glad it wasn't them. That laughter was sharper than a knife. It carved away the last scraps of hope clinging to my ribs. And in that moment, standing alone on hot concrete, with the sun sinking behind me and the sky bleeding into night, I understood something I hadn't let myself think before. If I survived this, I would never go back. I wasn't their joke, I wasn't their test, and I wasn't going to die here. If anyone had asked me to describe my life at 27, I would have said it felt like being wallpaper in a room no one noticed anymore. Always there, always peeling at the corners, always fading under someone else's spotlight. I lived in the same small town in Utah where I was born. A place with cracked sidewalks, one blinking traffic light, and the smell of dust and diesel baked into the air. Every morning I walked to the pharmacy 2 blocks from my house, tied my hair back in a limp ponytail, and spent 9 hours ringing up allergy meds and arthritis creams for people who barely looked me in the eye, except when they recognized me from Lexi's TikTok. That was always the worst. Watching their faces flicker with recognition, then amusement, as if they'd just spotted a circus sideshow on display. Hey, aren't you that emo sister? The one who can't take a joke. They never waited for an answer. They just laughed and walked away. Home wasn't much better. I lived with my mom, Pamela, my stepdad, Ralph, and Lexi, my half-sister, and the golden child of the house. Ralph ran a car dealership like he owned the whole county. At home, he treated me like unpaid staff. Mila, get the laundry. Mila, what's for dinner? His voice was always tinged with something between boredom and disdain, as if even saying my name was an inconvenience. Mom floated in and out of her own head. Some days she'd spend hours in bed sighing dramatically, like she was starring in her own tragic movie. Other days, she'd emerge just long enough to tell me that my energy was ruining the house. Lexi's trying to film content. Your mood is throwing everything off. And Lexi didn't have to do anything except exist in soft lighting. Her life was curated for the internet makeup tutorials, inspirational quotes, stolen from Pinterest prank videos where she'd throw flour at Ralph's back and he'd fake a surprised laugh. Millions watched. Thousands commented. I was her favorite prop. Once she filmed me scrubbing the kitchen floor after Ralph spilled spaghetti sauce everywhere. She zoomed in on my hands, red and raw, then added a caption, "When you raise a daughter and a maid in one." The comments rolled in, laughing emojis, people diagnosing me with depression from a single video. Some told her to be nicer, most just found it hilarious. It would have been one thing if Mom had defended me, if she'd told Lexi to knock it off or deleted the videos. But she never did. She'd tilt her head, feigning thoughtfulness, and say things like, "Lexi's just expressing herself. Why do you always have to make everything dramatic?" Mila, I learned to fold myself smaller and smaller until I could slip between the cracks of their lives without making noise. I thought maybe if I was small enough, one day they'd finally miss me when I was gone. Every night after washing the dishes, wiping down the counters, and taking out the trash, I would lie awake and stare at the ceiling fan above my bed, listening to its whirring blades slicing the darkness into something almost bearable. And I'd wonder if anyone anywhere even knew I existed. If I disappeared tomorrow, would it matter? I didn't know then that I was already halfway gone. I didn't know that being left behind at that rest stop wasn't the start of my loneliness. It was the first time they let me see the truth of it. The first time I realized I was alone long before they drove away. One night after scrubbing the kitchen floor until my knees burned, I found myself reorganizing the hallway cabinet. It was mostly expired coupons, tangled phone chargers, and dried-up pens, but buried under a stack of old envelopes was something that made my breath catch in my throat. A photograph, faded at the edges, curling with age. In it, a man knelt in the grass, his arm wrapped protectively around a tiny girl with curly brown hair and scraped knees. Me. I must have been 4, maybe 5. The man was smiling softly, like the sight of me was enough to anchor him to the world. His eyes were tired, but kind, the kind of eyes that saw you even when no one else did. My chest ached in a way that felt ancient. I didn't remember ever seeing this photo before, but something about it felt like coming home to a place I'd only ever visited in dreams. My thumb traced the image, lingering over his gentle smile, the way his hand rested on my shoulder with easy familiarity. I turned the photo over, expecting a date or maybe a location scribbled in rushed handwriting. Instead, I froze. 7 words scrawled in my mother's sharp, slanted script: "Don't let her end up like him." My heart clenched so tight I felt dizzy. What did she mean? End up like him. Was he a failure? A drunk? A disappointment? Or was he simply someone who loved me more than she ever could bear to? I sat there on the cold linoleum floor staring at those words until they blurred. My hands shook so badly, the photo trembled with them. Finally, I slid it back into its envelope and tucked it into the pocket of my hoodie. I didn't tell anyone I'd found it. That night, lying in bed with the photo propped against my lamp, I studied his face again. The warm eyes, the crooked smile, the way he held me like I was something precious, not a burden to be carried or a mistake to be hidden. I whispered into the dark so quiet I wasn't sure I'd even said it aloud. If I end up like him, maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing after all. I didn't know it yet, but that photo was a spark. A question that would burn through every lie I'd been fed, because for the first time in years I wondered who I could have been if he had stayed, if love had stayed. A week after I found the photograph, while its secret still pulsed hot and restless in my chest like a truth too dangerous to touch, Ralph made his grand announcement at dinner. He didn't clear his throat or build up suspense. He simply set down his fork with deliberate care, picked up the steak knife, and began slicing into his meat with a heavy, rhythmic precision. Each cut sounded final. I watched him carve through the pink flesh and thought about how his authority worked the same way: quiet, methodical, irreversible. "We're going camping this weekend," he said. 3 days in the Sawtooth Mountains. No phones, no distractions, just us fixing what's broken. Mom flinched at the word broken, but she forced a smile anyway, clapping her hands together like a polite guest applauding an off-key performance. "That sounds lovely, Ralph." Across from me, Lexi wrinkled her nose, stabbing at her limp salad with her fork like it had personally offended her. "Ugh, do we have to sleep in tents, like actual tents?" "There's bears out there. Survival builds character," he replied, not looking at her. His gaze remained fixed on the blood seeping from his steak into the mashed potatoes. Then, almost as an afterthought, his eyes flicked up sharp and glittering in the chandelier light. "And you'll get plenty of content for your channel." That was all it took. Lexi's disgust melted away, replaced by her signature performative delight. She straightened her shoulders, flicked her hair back, and gasped theatrically. "OMG, yes, wilderness aesthetic. Nature detox, camping queen." The table filled with her sudden chatter about outfits filters and which camping brand might want a sponsorship deal. Mom nodded along her smile, glassy and far away. Meanwhile, I sat, frozen, my fork hovering above untouched peas, feeling the old dread slither up my spine like cold oil. Everything inside me whispered, "Don't go, don't go." My pulse fluttered against my ribs in a frantic rhythm. I knew this wasn't about bonding. It never was. With Ralph, nothing was ever about love or healing. It was about control, dominance, performance. And each of us had a role to play in his script. I already knew mine. I opened my mouth to speak, to say, "I can't, I'm working late, I don't feel well, I'm not coming." But before the words formed, Mom turned to me. Her eyes narrowed with that brittle disappointment that felt sharper than any knife. The look that told me I was once again the problem. Don't be selfish, Mila, she snapped, voice tight and small. Lexi wants this. We need to go as a family. Family. That word landed like a steel trap snapping shut around my ribs. I swallowed the protest burning in my throat. Guilt. My oldest habit overpowered instinct as it always did. I nodded instead, staring at my plate, willing the tears not to come. It's just 3 days, I told myself. You've survived 27 years in this house. What's another weekend? That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat cross-legged on my floor, the lamp casting a small golden pool across the carpet. I reached into my bookshelf and pulled out the poetry book where I'd hidden the photograph. My father's face gazed up at me, faded and creased at the corners, but somehow more real than anything else in my life. I traced the curve of his tired smile with my thumb and felt the ache rise sharp behind my eyes. If I end up like you, I whispered into the quiet, my voice trembling. Maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing after all. I didn't know it yet, but that camping trip would become the fault line of my life, the crack that split everything open. The moment I'd stop calling that house home, and the first time I'd ever dare to wonder what it might feel like to belong somewhere, anywhere that didn't ask me to disappear to survive. The Sawtooth Mountains rose in jagged lines against a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. They reminded me of a painting you'd see in a dentist's office, beautiful, sure, but cold and distant, indifferent to the pain happening beneath them. The ride up was cramped and stifling. Lexi took the front seat, of course, holding her phone high for her TikTok live stream. Road trip with the fam, she squealed to her followers. Let's see if my sister survives the wilderness without Wi-Fi. Laughing emojis flooded the screen, the pings ringing in my ears like gnats. I sat behind her, sandwiched between 2 duffel bags, unseen and unspoken to. Ralph drove with one hand gripping the wheel, the other gesturing as he launched into one of his sermons about resilience and family structure. Mom sat beside him, smiling softly, her eyes fixed on the passing trees, never once meeting mine in the rearview mirror. By the time we pulled into a dirt clearing near the trailhead, my gut was twisted tight. I couldn't name the feeling yet, but it sat in my stomach like spoiled milk. Lexi bounded out of the SUV, camera still rolling, twirling dramatically. Wilderness aesthetic. Nature, detox, she chirped. I stayed behind to unload the gear, arms aching before I even hoisted the first tent out. The roles fell into place instantly. Ralph barking orders, Mom offering flimsy encouragement, Lexi filming skits about her loser sister who couldn't pitch a tent. She got her content. I got dirt under my nails and a knot in my throat. That night after dinner, instant chili that I cooked while Lexi filmed over my shoulder, we sat around the campfire, or rather they sat. I cleaned up. Ralph leaned back on his folding chair, stretching like a lion after a meal. We need more wood, he announced. His eyes landed on me. Mila grabbed some. There's a clearing about 15 minutes back. I froze. Alone. It's dark. His mouth curled into a smirk. Let's see if you can do at least that right. I looked to Mom for help. She stared down at her lap. Lexi didn't even look up from her phone. So I went. I didn't argue, didn't beg. I grabbed a flashlight and walked into the trees' branches, scratching at my arms, the night air biting cold against my skin. The forest was silent, except for the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots. I told myself I'd be quick, 15 minutes. They'd all still be laughing when I returned. But when I stepped back into the clearing, the campsite was gone. Not just them. Everything. The tents, the stove, the chairs, even the marshmallows, packed up and vanished. The SUV was gone, its tire tracks swallowed by shadows. On top of a flat rock near where the fire had been sat a folded piece of notebook paper. My heart thudded dully as I picked it up. Written in thick black Sharpie, let's see if she can survive a little wilderness adventure. For a moment, the world blurred at the edges. Then, just beside the rock, something silver glinted in the moonlight. Lexi's bracelet. The one with the little star charm she never took off. My breath caught in my throat. She knew. She was in on it. This wasn't a prank gone too far. This was deliberate, cold, cruel. I sank down onto the damp ground, still clutching the bundle of firewood I'd gathered. At first I waited. 5 minutes, 10, an hour. The wind whispered secrets through the pine branches, secrets I wasn't ready to hear. And then something inside me shifted. Maybe it was rage, maybe it was grief, maybe it was the realization that if I stayed there waiting for them to come back, I would die exactly as they saw me, helpless. Small a burden too heavy to carry. I looked up at the stars, their cold brilliance burning holes through the black sky. My heart pounded against my ribs, fragile but furious. If I survive this, I whispered, I will never go back. And in that moment, I felt it for the first time, a quiet, dangerous resolve spreading through my veins. I wasn't their joke. I wasn't their test. I was going to live, and I was going to leave them behind. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just picked a direction and started walking. Each step felt like a quiet rebellion crunching through fallen pine needles and brittle leaves. The forest around me was alive with shadows that shifted and breathed, whispering secrets I didn't want to hear. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then died, leaving me swallowed in a darkness so thick it felt like drowning. But I kept going. Standing still wasn't an option. That would mean surrender. And even after everything they'd done, the humiliation, the betrayal, the bone-deep loneliness, I wasn't ready to give them that. By dawn, my legs were trembling, my feet blistered and raw, wrapped in strips torn from the hem of my shirt. I rationed the stale granola bar I'd found in my coat pocket, chewing each bite until it dissolved into nothing. The sun rose pale and indifferent, brushing gold across the treetops like an apology from a sky that didn't owe me one. By midday, the trees thinned, the air grew hotter, and then I saw it, a stretch of asphalt shimmering in the heat haze. A 2-lane highway cutting across the nowhere I'd been trapped in. I stumbled to the roadside and raised my thumb, waiting as cars sped past without slowing. Drivers glanced at me with quick, skittish pity before looking away. Hours blurred. The sun moved across the sky, turning my skin hot and tight until I thought no one would ever stop. But then a dusty 18-wheeler rumbled down the road, brakes hissing as it pulled onto the gravel shoulder. The driver leaned out his window, gray stubble framing tired eyes, his flannel shirt soaked with sweat. He studied me carefully before saying, "You okay, sweetheart?" I nodded, then shook my head. I need a ride to the nearest town." He didn't ask for details. He just jerked his thumb over his shoulder and said, "Name's Emmett. Hop in. Hope you don't mind country radio." Inside the cab, the air smelled like burnt coffee and old leather. The dashboard was cluttered with snack wrappers, receipts, and a plastic Jesus glued to the dash. I hugged my knees to my chest and watched the road unwind before us, like a mercy I hadn't earned. Emmett didn't ask what happened. He talked about the weather, the wildfires up North Idaho, gas prices. I let his voice wash over me like a lullaby, something warm and impersonal that asked nothing of me. He dropped me at a gas station on the edge of a town so small it barely existed. One diner, one post office, a general store with flickering fluorescent lights. I stood by the payphone outside, my fingers trembling as I dialed a number I hadn't called in over a decade. The phone rang twice before a voice answered, low and raspy, but unmistakably familiar. "This is Robin." My throat closed up. "It's me. Mila." There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. Her reply came steady and certain. "Where are you?" I read the faded letters painted on the gas station window. "Porter's Fuel. Just off Highway 21. I'll come get you," she said, no hesitation in her voice. "You're not theirs anymore." I sank down onto the curb, the cracked concrete warm beneath me. Cars hummed past their tires, whispering of lives I hadn't lived. I sat there head bowed, feeling her words echo through my chest like an incantation, like a door swinging open into a world I hadn't dared to imagine. And for the first time, I let myself believe it might be true. Robin arrived nearly 2 hours later, her old Jeep Wrangler pulling up in a cloud of summer dust. The car was the color of rusted copper, its paint chipped along the wheel wells, streaked with old pine sap. She stepped out with the slow, deliberate movements of someone who knew there was never a need to rush. Her jeans were worn thin at the knees, her flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, and her silver hair was pulled back into a loose braid that brushed her shoulder blades. She looked like she'd walked out of a Wendell Berry poem, part mountain, part memory. Her eyes swept over me, my dirt-smudged face, the torn hem of my shirt wrapped around my blistered feet, hair tangled and wild from hours in the wind, and she didn't flinch. She didn't tilt her head with pity or widen her eyes in horror. She just looked at me like she was taking inventory of what was broken and what could be salvaged. She didn't say, "Oh, honey," or "What happened to you?" She didn't ask any questions at all. Instead, she reached across the passenger seat, pushed the door open, and said, "You hungry?" I nodded, unable to shape words around the lump in my throat. We drove in silence. The Jeep rattling down the cracked highway windows rolled down to let in the sharp, clean smell of pine and dust. I watched the scenery blur past flat plains, giving way to dense evergreen forests, the late afternoon light pooling gold in the tree trunks. The wind tangled my hair around my face, and I left it there, a curtain between me and the world. Robin's cabin sat on the outskirts of Bend, Oregon, tucked between towering lodgepole pines, the narrow creek behind it whispering secrets as it wound through moss and stone. The porch creaked under our weight. Inside, the place smelled like cedar smoke and old books. The shelves bowed under the weight of thick novels and dog-eared field guides, jars of dried herbs lining the windowsills. 2 ancient cats, Pickle and Moss, dozed on mismatched armchairs, barely lifting their heads to acknowledge me before drifting back into their private feline dreams. Robin handed me a folded flannel blanket, its threads softened from years of washings, and set a chipped mug of chamomile tea on the kitchen table beside me. "Couch is yours," she said, gesturing with her chin toward the battered brown sofa pushed against the far wall. "Bathroom's down the hall. If the cats snore, don't take it personal." That night I lay curled up on her couch, the blanket tucked under my chin, listening to the cabin creak and sigh around me as it settled into the cool summer night. My muscles ached from miles walked. My skin still smelled of sweat and fear, but the silence here felt different. It didn't feel sharp and punishing like the silence back home. This silence felt quiet, soft, like a room that expected nothing from me except to breathe. In the morning, I woke to the smell of strong coffee and wood smoke drifting in through the cracked window. Robin set a piece of paper in front of me while I picked at a slice of toast. It was a handwritten list in her small, careful script. "Jobs in town," she said. "Nothing glamorous. But work heals more than pity." I ran my eyes down the list. Cashier at the food coop, dishwasher at the diner, afternoon stock clerk at the hardware store. My chest tightened with something I couldn't quite name. Fear, gratitude, or maybe just the dizzying lightness of choice. I circled food co-op and handed it back. She just nodded once as if she'd already known. A year passed in Oregon like a long, quiet exhale. I spent my days working shifts at the coop, learning the names of wildflowers that grew along Robbins Creek, lupine yarrow, Queen Anne's lace, and finding small pieces of myself hidden in those quiet moments, rinsing fresh berries under cold tap water, folding grocery bags into perfect triangles, driving dusty back roads with Caleb beside me. Windows rolled down, his calloused hand resting warm and steady on my thigh. Some nights we parked by the edge of the forest, headlights illuminating the trembling pines, and he'd kiss me slow and deliberate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of my survival. Other nights we lay in Robin's backyard on an old quilt, the cats curled at our feet, whispering constellations to each other until dawn stained the sky pale pink. Then one ordinary afternoon, while I was crouched in aisle 4 restocking dried pasta, my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. An email notification lit up the screen, and the sender's name froze my blood. From Pamela Hart. Subject: Please call us. For a long moment, I didn't move. I slid my phone back into my pocket, forced my hands to keep shelving box after box of spaghetti, each motion mechanical and trembling. But the words burned under my skin like acid, eating through every layer of resolve I had built this past year. During my lunch break, I slipped out back by the dumpsters, the smell of spoiled milk and damp cardboard curling around me, and opened it. Mila, we need your help. Lexi is in trouble. She's being sued by hundreds of her followers for promoting a cryptocurrency that turned out to be a scam. She didn't know, baby. She thought she was helping the family. Ralph's dealership is under investigation for fraud. We're losing everything. Please, Mila, you're still family. We need you. Love, Mom. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My thumb hovered over reply, my breath shallow and hot, but I forced myself to close the app. My break was over. Customers were waiting. The lentils and oat milk didn't care about the collapse of my past. They just needed scanning and bagging, and for the first time in a long time, I was grateful for something so small and simple to ground me. That night, I lay awake on Robin's couch, the ceiling above me a dark, silent ocean. I thought about Lexi, about her ring light, glowing eyes wide and lips glossy, as she promised thousands of kids that investing in her exclusive coin would change their lives forever. I thought about Ralph with his sermons on family resilience, forging signatures and siphoning pensions to keep his kingdom alive. They hadn't just failed. They'd exposed the rot beneath every pastel-filtered selfie and curated caption. The next morning, Caleb found me out back by the loading dock, sitting on a crate with tears dried into salt tracks on my cheeks. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just set down a steaming thermos of coffee beside me, the metal clinking softly against the concrete, and squeezed my shoulder. His hand was hard and warm and real. 2 days later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Is this Mila Hart? The voice was thin, reedy, trembling with something close to panic. Yes. Who is this? It's Lexi, she whispered, her voice so small I barely recognized it. Please, I don't know who else to call. I almost hung up. But something in her tone, stripped of its gloss, its poison, its practiced cruelty, kept me listening. They're going to take everything she choked out, words dissolving into hiccuping sobs. I didn't know the coin was fake. Dad told me it was legit. He said if I promoted it, it would save us. I thought if I did this, maybe he'd, love me again. And there it was, the truth buried beneath every filtered video, every perfect post. She was just another pawn groomed to serve the family's image discarded when her usefulness ended. Please, she begged. I can't go to jail, Mila. You're smart. You always were. You can fix this. I closed my eyes and memories slashed through me like knives, her filming me scrubbing floors, calling me an emo loser, for views her laughter ringing in my ears as they left me alone at that rest stop, a note taped to the bench like I was disposable. And now she was the one discarded, a fallen influencer drowning in lawsuits and vomit emoji comments. The internet that once worshipped her now spat venom and mockery. Crypto scammer gets what she deserves. I drew a slow, shaking breath. I'm sorry, Lexi. Mila, please, I can't fix this, and I won't. Silence crackled across the line. Then came a sob, sharp and childlike, a sound that once would have undone me. For a fleeting moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. But pity is still a chain. And I wasn't hers to chain anymore. When I hung up, the air around me felt cold and clean. Robin was at the counter chopping onions, the radio playing low in the background. She glanced at me, her eyes steady and knowing, then slid a small envelope across the table. "I found this in the attic," she said softly. "It's yours." Inside was another letter from my grandmother Lila. Her words shimmered through my tears as I read, "You come from a line of women who survived by shrinking, but you, little bear, were born to grow beyond them. Find your strength and keep walking." I folded the letter and pressed it to my chest, feeling its quiet power seep into my bones. Outside, the Oregon sky spread wide and pale above the pines, endless as forgiveness. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't want revenge. I wanted freedom, and I was finally strong enough to claim it. I didn't answer Lexi's texts after that call. They came in floods, at first long, rambling pleas laced with half apologies that tasted of desperation and old entitlement, then sharp, stinging threats when silence became too loud for her to bear. "You're heartless, Mila. You think you're better than us. Don't forget who raised you." Then finally silence. Blessed golden silence that settled over my life like morning light through the pine trees. And in that silence, my life in Oregon moved forward with a quiet, unstoppable momentum. Mornings at the coop became routine, greeting customers with their reusable jars, restocking dried lentils, slicing fresh soap bars in the stockroom with a wire cutter that sang softly against the hardened lavender and goat milk. Afternoons, I walked down the gravel road to Caleb's garage, where the smell of oil and rust felt grounding real. At first, I just swept floors and organized bolts by size, their tiny hexagonal bodies clinking like coins into labeled jars. But one afternoon, Caleb handed me a spark plug streaked with grime and nodded toward an old Ford pickup with a faded blue hood. "Want to try changing it?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. I hesitated, glancing at the labyrinth of wires and metal. My pulse thudded in my throat. He shrugged lightly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "You've got steady hands, Mila. That's rare." So I tried. My fingers fumbled, at first slipping on the slick metal, but then they steadied. I breathed slow and deep, feeling the cold weight of the socket wrench, and twisted it until the old plug came free. By the end of the hour, the engine turned over with a satisfying growl that vibrated through my bones. Caleb smiled, small but real, the kind that flickered warm across his whole face. "That's all you," he said softly. At night, I sat at Robin's old oak kitchen table, her battered laptop humming beneath my fingertips as I enrolled in an online accounting course using a scholarship she had quietly applied for in my name. Numbers felt like puzzles. Honest puzzles with fixed answers, not shifting rules or hidden malice like the ones I'd grown up solving just to survive dinner. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and the cats curled warm and heavy against my feet, I lost myself in spreadsheets until dawn peeked pale through the curtains. Some nights, when I was still up past midnight reviewing balance sheets, Caleb would stop by on his way home from a late tow job. He'd set a steaming thermos of coffee beside me, kiss the top of my head, and whisper, "Don't stay up too late, Bean." Bean. That's what he called me. Small, quiet, but growing. Stronger every day. After finishing the course, I began offering bookkeeping services to local garages and small businesses. Word spread fast. By spring, I had 6 clients. I printed simple business cards on recycled cardstock with a tiny sprig of rosemary embossed in the corner. Mila Hart Small Business Accounting and Financial Strategy. Seeing my name in bold, unflinching letters felt like planting a flag on land I had carved from nothing but grit and hope. With my first real paycheck, I bought a second-hand drafting table from a retired architect who lived 2 towns over. I set it up by the window in Robin's spare room where the early sun spilled across the floorboards in honeyed light. I unpacked my old pencils, the ones I'd carried across states like secret weapons, and arranged them neatly in a chipped ceramic mug. That night, I sat at the table long after the house went quiet, drawing lines and shadows that felt like breathing. Not for TikTok, not for approval. Just for me. One evening, after finishing payroll for a client, I flipped open my sketchbook to a blank page and began to draw my father. Not as the faded photograph showed him young and tired with too much sorrow in his eyes, but as I imagined him now older, lined with gentle age, his hair streaked with silver like mine, his eyes still soft with quiet hope. When I finished, I pinned the drawing to the corkboard above my desk. For the first time, I didn't hide his face away in a closed notebook. I wanted to see him every morning when I sat down to build a life neither of us had been allowed to dream. Sometimes I'd catch Robin watching me with a small, proud smile tugging at her mouth, like she was seeing something bloom she'd almost stopped believing in. Once, while we washed dishes together under the amber kitchen light, she nudged my arm with her elbow. "You're starting to look like yourself," she said softly. I rinsed a mug, feeling the heat seep into my chilled fingers, and placed it on the drying rack. "Yeah," I whispered back. "Feels good." And it did. It felt like honey dissolving on my tongue, like sunlight warming cold skin after a season of endless dark, like standing barefoot in dew-wet grass and feeling finally that I belonged to the world, not to their shadows, not to their small, fearful definitions of love. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was building. I thought I'd left them behind for good. But ghosts have a way of finding you even years later, long after you've swept out the old rooms of your life and lit candles in every dark corner. They slip through cracks you thought you sealed, whispering your name like a curse you can never quite shake. It started with an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Please, it's urgent." Against my better judgment, I opened it feeling that old tightness coil around my chest. Mila. I know you probably hate us, but Lexi is in real trouble. Her lawsuit settlements are bankrupting her. Dad's dealership is gone. Mom is sick. We don't know what to do. You're still family. Please, Bailey. The name tasted like rust and old wounds on my tongue. Bailey with her perfect hair and sharp little teeth disguised as compliments. The golden girl now tarnished and crawling back to the sister she'd built her crown upon. I didn't reply. Instead, I closed my laptop, grabbed my jacket, and walked barefoot down to the creek behind Robin's cabin. The water was cold, biting at my ankles as I waded in up to my shins. The current whispered around my skin, carrying silt and pine needles and secrets downstream. I stood there in the fading light, letting dusk settle into my bones, feeling the weight of what they wanted from me. They didn't want me. They never had. What they wanted was my stability, my calm, my unbrokenness, the very parts of me they spent years trying to shatter, now suddenly valuable because they needed saving, because their world was crumbling and mine finally was not. The next day, a package arrived at the coop forwarded from Utah. Cynthia set it on the break room table with a curious glance but said nothing. Inside was my childhood sketchbook. Its cover was torn, cardboard softened and peeling at the corners. The pages were creased and smudged with old graphite ghosts. But someone had laminated the drawings, carefully flattening each page as if preserving fossils dug from forgotten earth. Tucked between the sketches was a folded note. Mila. I'm sorry for everything. I know sorry doesn't fix this. But I saw your art going viral and thought maybe you'd want this back. Dylan Reeves. Ralph's estranged son from his first marriage. The boy who used to sneak me extra cookies at Christmas when no one was looking. I hadn't seen him since I was 9 after Ralph kicked him out for reasons no one explained. I ran my fingers over my old drawings, shaky pencil portraits of flowers, stray dogs, quiet-eyed people who never spoke. On the last page was a self-portrait I'd drawn at 16. Someone probably... Lexi had scrawled across it in thick red Sharpie, "Nobody wants you." I stared at those words for a long time, the old sting rising sharp and bitter on my tongue. Then slowly I pinned the page to my corkboard right beside the portrait I'd drawn of my father. I didn't cover the graffiti. I left it exposed, a scar turned into a landmark. Proof of how far I'd walked since the girl who believed those words. 2 weeks later, Caleb and I drove into Boise to meet a potential client, a family-run auto shop looking for bookkeeping help after being bled dry by a corporate chain. On the way home, we passed the diner where Ralph used to take us for Sunday pancakes. The neon open sign was half burned out and a faded for sale notice was taped to the window. For a fleeting moment, I pictured him sitting in a cracked vinyl booth, suit wrinkled, tie loosened, staring down at a cup of cold coffee gone bitter with neglect. I wondered if he ever thought of me, the daughter who never bent far enough to break. That night back in Oregon, I built a small fire in Robin's wood stove. I sat cross-legged on the stone hearth, knees tucked to my chest, watching the flames lick orange and gold across the darkened room. I took out Bailey's email, printed and folded small in my palm, read it one last time, then fed it to the fire. The paper curled in blackened words dissolving into ash that floated up the chimney and out into the starless night. Some bridges are meant to burn, especially if you never want to cross back. Before bed, I flipped open my sketchbook to a clean page and began to draw. My pencil moved fast and sure across the paper, carving out the silhouette of a woman standing barefoot in a riverhead, tilted back hair streaming behind her like dark water woven with moonlight. She looked unbreakable, free. When I finished, I wrote beneath it, "Not the girl who got left behind. The woman who kept walking." I set my pencil down, letting the quiet of the cabin settle into my bones. Outside, the Oregon pines whispered in the wind, and the creek hummed its secret lullaby under the dark, and for the first time in my life I felt completely, irrevocably free. Not because they were gone, but because I finally was. 3 years after they left me in the woods, I stood on a different kind of threshold. My small accounting business was thriving. I spent my days balancing books for local garages, tiny bakeries smelling of cardamom and yeast, roadside antique stores cluttered with dusty typewriters and glass bottles that caught the light like stained glass. People paid their invoices on time and thanked me by name. Mila Hart. Seeing it printed on their checks still felt unreal, like I'd borrowed someone else's confidence and was waiting for them to ask for it back. One early morning, Robin found me at the kitchen table, laptop open, invoices spread out like playing cards mid-game. She set her chipped blue coffee mug beside my elbow and cleared her throat softly. "You ever think about going back?" she asked, her voice gentle but unflinching. "Just to see it from the other side." I knew what she meant. Closure. The final stitch in a wound left open too long. A chance to stand where I once knelt, broken and terrified, and feel the space shift beneath my feet. So Caleb and I packed up Phoenix, the '67 Mustang we'd spent months restoring together, its turquoise paint gleaming bright as the promise of summer, and drove east. Back toward Idaho. Back toward the sawtooths. The mountains rose into view by afternoon, jagged and indifferent, as always their slopes quilted with shadow and light. But I felt no fear. Only a quiet curiosity, like visiting an old battlefield that no longer smelled of blood or smoke, just wildflowers reclaiming the churned-up soil. We parked near a trailhead I recognized instantly, marked by the twisted pine stump that once terrified me. Its bark was split with age moss, softening its wounds. Caleb turned off the engine and sat with his hands resting lightly on the wheel. The air between us hummed with silent understanding. "You sure?" he asked, voice low, eyes steady on mine. I nodded, feeling the tight ache behind my ribs loosen with each breath. "Yeah, I need to see where she ended so I can know where I began." We hiked the narrow path, dappled sunlight flickering through the high branches. Birds chattered overhead, small and defiant. The clearing opened before us, overgrown with tall grass and wild yarrow swaying in the breeze. The old fire pit stones lay scattered and half sunken into the earth, their hard edges softened by moss and rain. Nature had reclaimed what they left behind, erasing their cruelty with a patience so gentle it made my throat ache. I knelt in the grass, pulled dried petals from my pocket, lavender for calm sage, for cleansing eucalyptus for strength. I scattered them over the dirt without prayer or poetry, just silence, because letting go didn't need words, it only needed truth. For a moment I closed my eyes and saw them there, Lexi camera held, high lips curled in practiced delight. Ralph arms crossed over his chest, eyes glinting with smug satisfaction. Mom standing slightly behind, eyes downcast, pretending not to see. I watched them flicker like an old film reel, faces pale and ghostly in the forest shadows. And then I imagined them fading, dissolving into the trees like morning fog under rising sunlight. When I opened my eyes again, the clearing was empty, except for the whisper of wind through grass and the quiet thrum of my own heartbeat. I stood up, brushing dirt from my jeans, feeling lightness bloom beneath my ribs like the first breath after a long drowning. We walked back to Phoenix, our footsteps crunching softly on gravel. On the drive home, the sun dipped low behind the pines, painting the winding road in long golden shadows. Caleb reached over and rested his hand on my thigh, his thumb stroking slow, sure circles into my jeans. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing left to say. Silence for once felt like peace instead of punishment. That night back in Oregon, I sat at my drafting table by the window, the coastal wind rattling the panes. I flipped open my sketchbook to a clean page and drew myself hair tangled in the salt air, standing barefoot on the roof of Phoenix Arms, spread wide to the endless horizon. When I was done, I wrote beneath it, "She wasn't the girl who got left behind. She was the woman who kept walking." I set down my pencil, staring at the sketch until the lines blurred with tears I didn't bother to wipe away. Because as they fell, I felt something settle deep in my bones, like a promise written in a language only I could read. They hadn't left me behind to die. They'd set me free to live. And this time, I knew I would. We didn't send out invitations. There was no registry to curate, no floral arch dripping with roses and eucalyptus. Just a handful of folding chairs arranged on the sand, a driftwood altar Caleb built with his own calloused hands, and the Oregon wind tugging at my veil like nature's quiet blessing. Robin officiated the ceremony. She stood barefoot in the dunes, her voice calm and sure as the waves rolling behind her, carrying words of grace that felt older than any chapel prayer. Kendra stood beside me, her cheeks wet with tears that glimmered like salt crystals in the late afternoon sun. Lila, my grandmother, snapped photos with an old film camera that once belonged to her husband, squinting through the viewfinder like she could see time bending, folding this moment into every memory we'd almost lost. Caleb's best friend brought a small lemon cake topped with sprigs of fresh rosemary, its scent bright and clean in the sea breeze. When it was my turn to speak, I turned to face them, these people who had not raised me, but who showed up when I needed raising the most. My family isn't who I was born to, I said, my voice carrying over the thunder of the Pacific. My family is who stayed, who listened, who let me grow. There were tears, yes, but not the sharp kind that sting with regret. These were warm tears. Quiet tears, the kind that come with peace falling softly, as if they were simply the body's way of saying thank you to the soul for surviving long enough to feel this. After the vows, Caleb took my hand and led me down the sand toward the shoreline. We stood there barefoot, salt mist curling around our ankles, the tide pulling in and out like a quiet promise beneath our feet. He leaned down until his forehead rested against mine and whispered, "You're free now, Bean." I smiled against his lips, feeling the truth of it sink deep into my chest. "I think I always was," I whispered back. That evening, after the sun slipped beneath the sea in a blaze of rose and bruised purple, after the folding chairs were packed away and the guests drifted off into the soft darkness, I stood alone on the porch of our small seaside cottage. The ocean spread before me, endless and black, its hush and roar braiding into a lullaby older than language. Inside, I could hear Caleb laughing with Kendra over leftover cake crumbs, their voices low and tender, weaving through the warm lamplight like music I never thought I'd get to hear. I thought about Utah, about Ralph's sermons, dripping with false virtue, about Mom's empty sighs curling like cigarette smoke in dim rooms, about Lexi's ring light glare and the echo of her laughter as the van pulled away. And I realized I hadn't thought of them in days. The old wounds still ached when the weather turned cold like healed bones remembering where they once splintered. But they no longer defined my shape. I stepped inside, let the door close behind me with a quiet click, and pulled my sketchbook off the kitchen counter. On a fresh page, I drew myself again, this time sitting cross-legged in the sand hair tangled by the wind, the entire ocean spread before me under a dawn that bled gold into the horizon like hope reborn. Beneath it, I wrote, "They thought leaving her behind would break her. They didn't know it would set her free." I closed the book and set it gently beside Caleb's half-empty coffee mug, letting the smells of salt air, lemon cake, rosemary, and engine oil fill my lungs until it felt like I could taste my entire life, bitter and sweet, broken and whole, all of it mine. Outside, the tide pulled away from the shore, then rushed back in over and over like a quiet promise. Life will always return to you if only you keep walking forward to meet it. And this time, I wasn't just surviving. I was living. Finally, fully, unbreakably living. Most mornings, I wake before the sun. The cabin is still and dim, the world outside wrapped in blue-gray twilight. Only the low, sleepy hum of the old fridge and the occasional groan of settling wood break the silence. Beside me, Caleb's breathing is deep and even, his chest rising and falling in a rhythm that soothes the restless edges of my mind. His arm drapes heavy across my waist, anchoring me to a softness I never knew I'd crave, a safety that feels almost holy in its quiet constancy. I slip out from under the quilt, careful not to wake him, and pad barefoot across the cool pine floors. The chill bites at my ankles, but it feels clean, bracing, like the first deep inhale after a sleepless night. In the kitchen, I pour coffee into my chipped blue mug, the one Robin gave me when I moved in, its handle worn smooth by decades of other tired hands. Steam curls up into the dim light, carrying with it the earthy, bittersweet scent that tells my body it's time to begin again. Outside, the ocean is still hidden behind a veil of pale morning fog, but I can hear its steady roar, a sound that has become a kind of prayer, patient, eternal, promising that no matter how many times the tide pulls away, it always returns. I sit by the window with my knees tucked to my chest, sketchbook balanced against my thigh pencil, hovering over the blank page like a quiet dare. These days, my drawings aren't about proving anything to anyone. They're not desperate attempts to justify my worth or scream my pain onto paper. Now they're small moments caught like fireflies in a jar, Caleb's hands buried deep in an engine block grease smudged on his forearms. Robin trimming rosemary by her kitchen window hair twisted up with a pencil. Pickle and moss curled together in a silent yin-yang on the sunlit rug. Ordinary things, mundane things. Things that matter because they exist without demanding anything from me but presence. Sometimes I sketch self-portraits, not of the broken girl I once was, all sharp angles and silent screams, nor of the rage-fueled survivor who fought each day like a battle she never chose. Instead, I draw the woman I am now, strong in quiet ways, eyes soft but unflinching, anchored by a piece I built plank by plank with my own trembling hands. There are still shadows, nights when I wake gasping, tasting old fear on my tongue, my chest tight with ghosts of memories that have long lost their teeth. But they pass. Each time they do, they leave me a little lighter like shed skin. When the sun finally crests the horizon, casting warm gold across the cottage walls, I set down my pencil and close my sketchbook. I wrap my hands around my cooling mug, breathe in the mingled scents of coffee salt air and rosemary drifting in through the open window, and whisper into the hush of the waking world. Thank you for letting me stay. Because for the first time, I understand that staying isn't about being trapped. It's about belonging. and this time I belong to myself. I think about him more now than I ever did growing up, my father. His name was Thomas Hart, though no one ever spoke it aloud in that house. To them, he was just a cautionary tale, a shadow flickering in Mom's voice when she'd snap, "Don't end up like him." But they never told me what that meant. Was it his poverty, his quietness, his unwillingness to bend himself into something they could display? The warning was always vague, like an unfinished sentence trailing off into bitterness. Some nights I lie awake with his photograph propped against my chest, studying his face in the faded print. Tired eyes, gentle mouth hair falling over his brow like he'd forgotten to care. There's something in his expression that looks like me when I'm sketching that quiet, focused softness that no one can touch. The kind of softness people mistake for weakness until they realize it's where all your strength lives. Robin told me once that he was a painter. Landscapes, mostly old barns sagging under prairie skies, lonely trees clinging to rocky hillsides, and sometimes portraits of strangers he met at diners and gas stations. He never made much money. Mom called him a dreamer, said it like it was a disease. But I think about the way he held me in that photo, his arms strong and protective around my small shoulders, his hand resting over my heart as if to say, "This is where you keep your truest self," and I wonder if dreams were all he had to give. If so, then they were enough. I wonder what he would think of me now, a woman who runs her own accounting business out of a tiny studio behind her cottage, who wakes before dawn to sketch by the window while the ocean whispers outside, who loves a man with oil-stained hands and a voice that calls her bean like it's a prayer. Would he be proud? Would he see himself in the way I tilt my head when I'm thinking, or in the shape of my knuckles wrapped around a pencil? Would he hear himself in the small hum I make when I'm concentrating a sound? Caleb teases me for, but says he loves because it means I'm happy. Sometimes I imagine him sitting across from me at this kitchen table, a chipped mug of black coffee cradled between his paint-smudged fingers. He'd wear an old denim shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and his eyes would crinkle at the corners when he smiled. I'd tell him about the life I've built here, the clients who trust my numbers, the neighbors who bring me fresh eggs, the cats who curl up on my sketchbook if I leave it open too long. I'd tell him about Robin, who taught me that strength isn't loud, about Caleb, who taught me that love isn't pain, about how I've learned to choose softness without shame. I'd tell him I finally understand that life isn't about being seen by everyone. It's about being seen by the right ones and loving them back with every quiet, defiant breath. I'd tell him that dreams don't have to feed you to sustain you, that some dreams keep you alive just by existing in the corners of your days, like hidden lanterns lighting your way forward when all you can see is darkness. And I think he'd nod slow and thoughtful, like men do when they're trying to memorize a moment. He'd sip his coffee, set the mug down, and reach across the table to squeeze my hand in his paint-stained one. "You're braver than I ever was, little bird," he'd say, his voice low and rough with pride. "But I see me in you. I see you in me." When I finish my coffee each morning, I set his photograph beside my empty mug, the two of them side by side like bookends holding up all the stories between us. Outside, the ocean roars against the cliffs, steadfast and ancient, and gulls wheel through the salt spray like scraps of living light. And I whisper into the quiet words only he and the rising sun will ever hear. "I ended up like you, Dad, and I think that's the best thing I've ever done." Then I close my sketchbook stand to greet the day and step forward into a life he would have recognized, a life made not of applause but of honest work, tender love, and the unbreakable courage of staying gentle in a world that tried to harden me. Because in the end, he wasn't a failure. He was a seed, and I am his wild, unstoppable bloom. I never thought I'd be here. Standing barefoot on the pale oak floors of the nursery, we painted together, my hand resting on the gentle swell of my stomach, watching Caleb assemble the crib with quiet concentration. The morning light spills through the sheer white curtains, catching in the strands of his messy hair, illuminating the curve of his cheek, the small crease between his brows as he tightens each bolt with deliberate care. He looks up at me and grins, his eyes crinkling at the corners in that way that always makes my chest ache with softness. Almost done, Bean. Think our little one will like it. My throat tightens around words too big to fit. I nod instead, pressing my palm against the growing curve beneath my ribcage, feeling the soft flutter deep inside life, real and warm, moving under my skin like a secret I'm only just learning to understand. Tears prick the corners of my eyes, but I blink them back. Not because I don't want him to see, but because the feeling is too big, too holy to name aloud. He sets down the wrench and crosses the room in 2 easy strides, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind, hands resting gently over mine on my belly. I feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing against my back, the weight of his chin as he rests it on my shoulder. For a moment, the entire world narrows to this single fragile truth: we are here. We are whole. We are building something no one can take away. At night, I lie curled on my side in our bed, the sheets cool against my bare legs, Caleb's hand curved protectively over my stomach, his thumb stroking slow, rhythmic circles across my skin. Sometimes in the dark, I talk to the baby in hushed whispers. I tell them about the creek behind Robin's cabin, how the water whispers over mossy stones, about the taste of wild blackberries picked warm from the sun, about the way the ocean smells at dawn, sharp and clean, the waves sighing against the shore like a mother's lullaby. But mostly I make promises. I will never make you feel small to make myself feel big. I will never use your silence as proof of your weakness. You are not here to heal my wounds. You are here to become whoever you are meant to be, and I will protect that becoming with every breath in my body. In the quiet, I think about my mother, about her sharp sighs slicing through my childhood like knives, the tired eyes that never softened the way her love curled into a weapon honed on my silence. I wonder if she ever felt this fierce, trembling devotion burning through my chest like a prayer. Maybe she did. Maybe she just didn't know what to do with it. Or maybe loving someone only terrified her more because she never learned that love could exist without ownership. But I do. I press Caleb's hand tighter against my belly, feeling the echo of his warmth sink into my bones. Outside, the waves crash against the shore, slow and patient, their rhythm older than any pain I carry. Inside, our baby shifts again, a small kick that makes me laugh out loud in the darkness. Caleb stirs his voice rough with sleep. "What is it, Bean?" he murmurs, eyes still closed. "They're kicking." I whisper my words, trembling with laughter and tears all at once. "They're saying goodnight." He smiles without opening his eyes, his thumb stroking one more slow circle before he drifts back to sleep. I lie there listening to the sea, feeling the quiet pulse of life beneath my skin, and I think about every version of myself that led me here. The girl scrubbing floors under fluorescent lights, the teenager who drew portraits of ghosts in secret notebooks, the woman who walked barefoot out of the woods and built herself a life from ashes. And in that moment, with the man I love breathing softly beside me and the future blooming quiet and unstoppable within me, I understand. This is what breaking the cycle feels like. Not like vengeance, not like triumph, but like gentleness, like holding the future in your palms and whispering, "You are safe here. Always. You are safe." Because love isn't just what you give, it's what you refuse to take away. And this time I will choose gentleness, again and again and again. This is a story about survival, but not just the kind where your heart keeps beating. It's about the quiet, unglamorous survival of staying soft in a world that tries to harden you, about learning that family isn't who shares your blood, but who protects your becoming. That breaking the cycle doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like waking up to a morning you chose in a place no one can take away from you. Most of all, It's about remembering. You were never what they said you were. You are who you choose to become. This is Mila's story, but maybe it's yours too. Stay gentle, stay fierce. I see you. Comment, I choose me, if you're ready to break your cycle.